Today, we're going to be speaking with Katherine Stewart, author of The Power Worshippers Inside the Dangerous Rise of Religious Nationalism, which is the award-winning book that inspired the Rob Reiner documentary, God and Country. Katherine, it's so great to have you on. To start with, maybe just to orient the audience, the religious right as we understand it today, this movement that includes religious nationalism, etc., how far back can we trace it, and what are its origins as far as you're concerned?
Well, there have long been strains of reactionary religion fused with identitarian nationalism in America. So, for example, in the 1920s, the American clergyman and far-right populist Gerald Smith, he was a white supremacist, and he started a movement called the America First Party. He was a member of the KKK, so he's deeply racist. He appeared to be a supporter of Hitler's rise to power. He actually modeled one of his groups on the brown shirts. He's very anti-Semitic, of course, arguing that America should not intervene in World War II. He eventually ran for president on a Christian nationalist ticket. He called himself the Christian Nationalist Party. He failed to win that bid, and he sort of faded into history. But Christian nationalism in its present form can really be traced to a movement in the late 1970s and early 1980s. It was called the New Right. There was this group of activists, including people like Paul Weyrich, Richard Viguerie, Howard Phillips, and Phyllis Schlafly was part of it. They all sort of felt the Republican Party had become too liberal, too soft on communism, and they also felt like religion in America was too liberal. They were upset with the influence of theologians like Paul Tillich and Niebuhr. These were sort of Protestant theologians that were emphasizing the social justice aspect of Christianity and the social gospel. And they were also really deeply upset about the IRS's threat to revoke tax privilege status of segregated schools. And they really wanted to sort of ignite a hyper-conservative counter-revolution and draw the Republican Party off to the right. And so they weren't all Protestant, by the way. They drew in ultra-conservative Catholics like George Weigel and Richard John Newhouse that shared some of their concerns. And they really landed on the abortion issue as a way to unite these sort of various strands of the movement. They could draw in conservative Protestants, conservative Catholics, and also draw in some of the sort of Christian fundamentalists, as Howard Phillips called them. So over time, they really worked hard to purge pro-choice voices from the Republican Party. Today, we have an all anti-abortion Republican Party. Everybody thinks that the Republican Party has always been anti-abortion. It's absolutely not true.
Mm.
In fact, I'm sorry going on for so long, but this is just like a really cool thing. If you're like a weird religion nerd like me, Phyllis Schlafly wrote a book called How the Republican Party Became Pro-Life. It really shows over time, it took a tremendous amount of effort to purge those pro-choice voices. But they did that and kind of united their new movement. And now you see this sort of pro-life religion that we see uniting the Republican Party. It's a modern creation, and it was created for political purposes.
I'm curious about some of the methods that this movement uses to amplify its influence. We understand that even though the country has moved more in the direction of being pro-choice, arguably than ever before, certainly the most from the Roe v. Wade era, the majority of the United States now thinks abortion in most cases should be legal. And yet there's the sense that the anti-abortion movement is still a pretty good way to raise money in certain parts of the country if you're running for elected office. So there's like the fundraising aspect. The book Waves of Rancor talks about how AM radio and talk radio were used from a very early stage, decades ago, through church radio, et cetera, to disproportionately push these narratives onto the airwaves. So there's like the media component of this. What are the strongest areas of influence for the religious right today in the United States?
The religious right is more than an ideology. It's more than the Christian nationalist ideology that says America's founded to be a conservative Christian nation. Our laws should be based on the Bible. That ideology is a tool for a leadership-driven political machine that turns that story into political power. This is not really about grappling with scripture. This is about
Mm,
power. This is about politics. And what they have done over the last 5 decades, 5+ decades, is invest a tremendous amount of money into a deep organizational infrastructure that works to transform our courts, transform the media system, and fracture America in these really important ways. So there are these, I want to describe in brief, describe this organizational infrastructure in detail in my book, The Power Worshippers. But you've got right-wing policy groups, you've advocacy organizations, legal advocacy organizations, you have networking organizations that bring together the leaders of the different organizations with deep-pocketed funders. There are very sophisticated data initiatives. There are initiatives that draw pastors into networks,
hmm.
organizations like Watchmen on the Wall and Faith Wins and Ministros Hispanos. These are organizations that, well, in the case of Watchmen on the Wall, they have tens of thousands of affiliated pastors. They hold events for these pastors. Look, movement leaders know very well if you can get people to vote on a single issue, you can control their vote. So
Right.
they draw these pastors, and pastors are often the most trusted voices in their communities. They draw these pastors into networks, give them messaging tools that they should use to turn out the vote, the conservative Christian vote. They're told, they tell their congregants, you need to vote your biblical values. They distribute very sophisticated voter guides that have like simple yes or no answers on questions of things like abortion, same-sex marriage, or what have you. These days, it's more broader LGBT stuff. They'll have that will always be a question. This sort of faux, sort of their definition of religious freedom, which is the freedom of people with the correct viewpoints to impose them on everybody else.
Yes.
So, I mean, this is the machinery, like much of it works as a giant voter turnout machine in election cycles. They know if you can, again, get people out to vote in disproportionate numbers, you can punch above your political weight. And so that's what they do. That's how they win elections.
Without a doubt, abortion has had a central role in this entire movement, as you talk about. I want to mention a few other areas of focus that have kind of come up over the last 5 years, which I don't believe originated from the group you're talking about, but there is now some overlap. And these include the anti vaccine stuff we saw during the pandemic. This includes concerns about books in public schools, be they about American history, slavery, LGBT issues, etc., an obsession with so-called DEI programs and diversity programs. There are all of these other semi-overlapping things that the religious right seems to have gotten involved with, at least to some degree. Can you talk about how that happened, why those issues are interesting or mobilizing to the religious right?
They needed other issues. Listen, let's be clear. Abortion rights are very popular in America. Both Democrats and Republicans support abortion rights in significant majorities. Even though the Republican Party casts itself as pro-life, a lot of people understand within the Republican Party that, at the end of the day, abortion rights are really critical for maternal safety, for instance. I mean, I've described this incident, this really horrible incident in my book, where I actually had an abortion to save my life during a pregnancy that went very wrong, and I'm hardly alone. A lot of women experience challenges with their sort of efforts to have children, and so given the fact that we can return to that later if you want, but given the fact that abortion is not only critical for maternal care, but also very popular across the board in many ways, the religious right needed fresh issues in order to, draw in people who were not on board with a total ban on all abortions from the quote moment of conception, whatever, that means. Means different people, different things, different people. So what so what they had to do is find these new issues. And
Mm,
critical race theory, first of all, critical race theory is not taught in public K through 12 schools. It just simply isn't. It was a small issue that was taught in little corners of some small law schools. But what it did is has the potential to activate these sort of racial anxieties that are critical to a large segment of the movement. And Christopher Rufo said it best. I don't have his tweet in front of me, but he tweeted something to the effect of, I'm going to paraphrase, he said, we're going to de-link the term critical race theory from what it really means and attach to it everything that people don't like. And then we're going to go after critical race theory. So they throw the teachings of slavery, America's 250-year history of slavery, from the first time, into that sort of CRT bucket. They turn teaching about Jim Crow, which really happened, and its consequences into that CRT bucket. But it's interesting. This serves two purposes. Number one, it activates racial anxieties, and it also gets new people on board in the movement. But this movement has a very long hostility to the institution of public education. So a lot of these issues like CRT and the book banning, it's really intended to reduce people's faith in public education. Reason for that is you got to follow the money. As a journalist, they tell you follow the money. It's always about the money. They really want to capture that public K through 12 budget and redirect the funding to private religious schools, which can teach whatever they like, including contempt for people of different faiths, or charter networks. There are quite a number of them that have a very strong ideological and even religious sort of agenda within them.
Can you talk a little bit in the time we have left about whether this may backfire this election cycle in this particular sense, which is Trump got his 3 Supreme Court justices. They overturned Roe v. Wade. Predictably, laws from 64, and I mean 1864, are now going back in force in places like Arizona at a time when the country is, as you mentioned, really either overtly or implicitly more in favor of abortion mostly being legal than ever before. Is there a chance this backfires in the 2024 election cycle?
There's a chance. I mean, I don't make predictions, but we have to look at what Trump does, not what he says. He promised religious right leaders that he would appoint radical anti-abortion judges. He did that.
Yes.
What we're seeing in Arizona with this disgraceful law is a consequence of that. He's repeatedly promised to end abortion. He's boasted over and over about overturning Roe versus Wade. We're seeing the consequences of this in red states. We're seeing the consequences of this in Alabama, where the Chief Justice, Tom Parker, banned IVF and cited scripture as he was doing so. And this logic would also ban many of the most popular and effective forms of birth control. And this movement has minted like real extremists. I mean, the movement just gets more and more extreme as it sort of continues to operate in this disinformation bubble. So here's the thing. Trump needs the support of this movement to win the election. That means that if he does win, we can expect a more aggressive push for these extreme measures, an all-out assault on women's rights and reproductive rights, a war on public education, even more far-right justices in our courts, an attack on the rights of working people. It's interesting that some of the people, we haven't even spoken about the funders of the movement, but many of them that are funding these sort of culture war initiatives are simultaneously funding an assault on workplace protections and rights for the workforce. So we can see a whole lot of that, and basically a wholesale attack on the separation of church and state. I think we need to focus more on the operatives who are now lining up behind Trump, because they're more radical and focused even than they were in the first term. I'm sure you have spoken on your podcast about Project 2025, which
Yes.
is a radical plan to remake the government as a sort of, MAGA loyalist MAGA government. But, I think this will be the most consequential presidential election, certainly of my lifetime.
That I agree with. We've been speaking about the book, The Power Worshippers Inside the Dangerous Rise of Religious Nationalism. And we've been speaking with the book's author, Katherine Stewart. Katherine, really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
It's great to speak with you. Thank you.